Why was the world suddenly silent? Mara Cole blinked through the dust as the shockwave faded. Her ears rang so hard it felt like her skull might split. For a second, she couldn't tell if she was alive or not, only that her body ached, her chest burned, and the copper taste of blood filled her mouth. The blast had thrown her into a mud-brick wall and stolen the sound from everything. But when the ringing began to fade, the silence gave way to chaos, the crack of rifles, the screams for a medic, the roar of another explosion somewhere too close. Medic! It came again, a desperate voice, barely cutting through the haze. That one word yanked her back to reality. She blinked grit from her eyes and saw through the swirling smoke. Commander Ryan Mercer was down, trying to crawl, blood pouring from his thigh. Training overrode fear. She moved before her mind could catch up. Hands shaking but precise, she checked her gear. Her aid pack was still miraculously strapped on, though one buckle was hanging by a thread. She didn't care. There wasn't time to think about what was broken, only who was. Half the squad was scattered across the courtyard, motionless shapes in dust and debris. Gunfire echoed off the walls. The air reeked of cordite and sweat. She counted muzzle flashes, direction, cover. Her heartbeat quickened but stayed controlled. That's what they drilled into medics, panic kills faster than bullets. She dropped beside Mercer, sliding through the dirt, unrolling a tourniquet with her teeth. His uniform was soaked crimson below the knee, the blood pooling in rhythmic bursts that told her exactly what she didn't want to know: femoral artery. She had seconds to stop it. He was still firing with one arm, grimacing. "Stay on the fight, Cole." "Sir, you'll bleed out if you don't shut up." The words came sharp, not disrespectful, survival sharp. Her gloved fingers pressed deep into the wound, the heat of the blood burning through the fabric. She twisted the tourniquet tight until the bleeding slowed, the flesh blanching pale. "Hold pressure," she barked to the nearest soldier, or maybe to herself. The sky above the compound burned orange with smoke and dust. Someone shouted coordinates into the radio, someone else screamed for cover. The whole valley echoed with gunfire. Mara barely noticed. Her world had shrunk to one wounded commander and the rhythmic task of keeping him alive. She forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That's what she told every new medic: you control your breath, you control your fear. But under that breath she was thinking, how did it go wrong so fast? 6 hours ago it had been routine. A simple op, that's what they'd said. Clear a compound, quick in, quick out. Intel claimed maybe half a dozen hostiles guarding a weapons stash. No civilians, minimal risk. She'd seen enough minimal risk missions to know the phrase was a lie, but even she hadn't expected this. Back then, before the first shot, before the world turned to fire, Charlie Company had moved through the valley like ghosts, a tight column, disciplined, quiet. The mountains around them were skeletal, the morning air thin and dry. Mara had walked near the middle, keeping her kit close, fingers brushing the flap of her med pack as if to reassure herself it was still there. The commander had been up front, Ryan Falcon Mercer. 35, steady voice, sharp eyes, always calm under pressure. She respected him more than she'd ever admitted aloud. He wasn't like some officers. He didn't bark for control or grandstand. He led. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, who'd once stayed up all night with a soldier who lost a brother back home. Mara had never said it out loud, but that kind of leadership meant everything. In a place where the world was chaos, Mercer was the quiet in the center of it. At 400 they'd left base, using the night as cover. No one spoke except through hand signals and the occasional whisper on comms. Specialist Harper was on point, young, steady, with the kind of alert stillness that comes from both fear and focus. When he clenched his fist and froze, the entire column halted instantly. Mara dropped to a knee, scanning through her NVGs. The compound sat ahead, a few squat buildings behind a low wall. No movement, no heat signatures on Overwatch. Too quiet. Mercer's voice had crackled softly over the radio. "Eagle Eye, this is Falcon 1. What do you see?" "Negative movement, Falcon. Thermal shows maybe 2, 3 inside the main structure." That should have been the warning, 2 or 3. But sometimes you don't hear what you don't want to believe. "Copy that," Mercer said. "We go in fast and hard." She remembered him turning, his eyes sweeping the line. "Stay tight. We're in and out before sunrise." It was the kind of confidence that made you forget you were walking into hell. Harper set the charge. Porter covered the breach. Mara checked her gloves, tightened her vest straps, and whispered a quiet prayer she'd repeated every mission. "Let me be fast, not perfect. Let me get to them before the light leaves their eyes." The charge blew the gate apart. Everything after that happened too fast for thought. Muzzle flashes, screams, the metallic crack of rounds hitting armor. Mara saw Harper go down first, then Porter, a burst through his neck that sprayed the wall red. She hit the dirt, sliding to him, already pulling gauze, seal, morphine. "Stay with me, Kyle," she said. "I got you." He gurgled, eyes wide and terrified. She pressed down, feeling his life pulse under her palms. All around, her squad was fighting for its life. The air shook with gunfire and the deep-throated echo of RPGs. Mara worked anyway. It's what medics do. The world can burn, but the work stays the same. Stop the bleeding, keep breathing, move to the next. "Cole, fall back," someone shouted, but she didn't move. Not until the bleeding slowed enough that he had a chance. Then she dragged him by his vest toward cover, her muscles screaming with effort. The wall behind her exploded, showering her in dust and rock. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. When she finally reached the main building, the rest of the squad was already falling back, fighting through the doorways, dragging each other inside. The interior was chaos, screams, orders, the sick, wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. Sergeant Maddox had shrapnel in his face. Brooks was tightening a tourniquet on his own leg, and Reyes, their comms man, was yelling into a radio that no one was answering. "Negative evac," came the crackled reply. "Storms in the mountains, nothing flying for 2 hours." 2 hours? Mara looked around at the wounded, at the smoke creeping through bullet holes, at Mercer barking orders at the window. 2 hours might as well have been forever. She didn't have time to feel fear. She worked patching, injecting, wrapping, every movement mechanical, practiced, each bandage another second bought against death. And still the enemy pressed in. Then the floor erupted. She never saw it, just heard a low click, a vibration, then white light. The blast threw her against the wall. Her ears went dead again. She hit hard, head swimming. When she opened her eyes, the ceiling was half gone, dust raining from above. Her hands were bleeding, her rifle gone. "Mara," someone shouted, but it was distant, muffled. She looked up. Commander Mercer lay on the ground, motionless. His leg was twisted, uniform shredded. Blood pooled beneath him. She crawled toward him, every inch a battle. Her pack hung from one shoulder, half torn open. She tore the rest free, yanked out gauze and sealant, and ripped open a tourniquet with her teeth. His eyes fluttered. "Go the others." "Not without you." She clamped the tourniquet high on his thigh and twisted until the blood stopped. The smell of iron filled the air. He gasped, half conscious, still trying to lift his rifle. Outside, gunfire roared closer. They were breaching the walls again. Mara looked at him, then at the door, then back at him. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could stay and die trying to keep him breathing, or fight to give them both a chance. "Pixie," she yelled, spotting Specialist Lawson through the haze. "Can you fight?" "Barely." "Then do it, hold that wall." Mara dragged Mercer across the floor, inch by inch, toward the back room. He was heavy, gear, armor, body limp. Every pull felt like her shoulders were tearing apart. She didn't stop. Bullets slammed into the walls around them. Shards of wood and dirt cut her face. She didn't care. Finally, they reached the back, a storage space barely big enough to crouch. She propped him against the wall, breathing hard. His eyes were open now, pale and glassy. "Cole," he rasped, "take my rifle." "Sir, no. You know what has to be done." She hesitated. Her gaze flicked to the door. She could hear the enemy shouting in Pashto, closing in. "I'm a medic," she whispered. "I don't." "You're a soldier first." His voice was fatting, but the steel in it was. "They need a leader, go." For a second her chest locked. She'd patched 100 wounds, comforted the dying, but she'd never picked up a weapon for real. Then something in her broke, or maybe it hardened. She grabbed the M4 from his hands. The metal felt heavy, foreign. She checked the magazine, half full. "I'll come back for you," she said. "I know you will." She turned, pressed her back to the wall, and stepped into the smoke. The sound hit her like a wall, shouting gunfire, chaos, but she moved through it like instinct, each step steady, each breath measured. Outside, the squad was almost gone, half wounded, half firing in desperation. Pixie was at a window, blood down her face. Ray's was on the radio, voice hoarse from shouting. They were losing. Until Mara raised Mercer's rifle. The first shot cracked through the air and dropped a fighter at the breach. The second took another. Her heartbeat steadied. She fired again and again. For the first time in her life, her hands meant to heal were ending lives. But every life she took bought another heartbeat for her own squad. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was the line between life and death. The muzzle flashed again, a brief strobe of light that painted her face in flickering orange. Mara barely registered the recoil now. Each shot was methodical, automatic. She crossed a line, and every trigger pull took her farther from the person she'd been that morning. Outside, the air rippled with the sound of war, the harsh clatter of AKs, the distinct metallic rhythm of M4 bursts, the haunting whistle of incoming RPGs. Every sound carried a meaning now. Where to move, where to aim, where to live. Pixie shouted something over the din, her voice cracking with adrenaline. "They're pushing left flank." "I see them," Mara yelled back. She pivoted, exhaled slowly, and fired. Two silhouettes dropped in the dust, collapsing like strings cut from heaven. Ray's called out from the radio. "Still no air support. They're saying weather's closing in, nothing flying." Mara didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. The fight had narrowed to a tunnel, target, breath, fire, reload. Her mind ran calculations faster than thought. Magazine count, wounded, cover distance, enemy direction. It was triage of a different kind, the medicine of survival. Then the sound came, a dull, hollow click. "Empty." Her stomach dropped. She ducked as rounds chewed through the plaster behind her. Her fingers moved with speed born from training she'd thought she'd never use. Eject, insert, tap, rack, fire. The weapon kicked again, and the rhythm returned. Through the haze of smoke, she saw what was left of Charlie Company. 7 soldiers, maybe 8, still fighting. Others were motionless, bleeding, or silent. Every one of them had once been a face she'd known, a laugh shared at the mess hall, a story told on long nights. Now they were names whispered in her head between gunfire. "Raise," she shouted, "ammo count." 3 mags, that's it." "Pixie." "Half a mag, maybe less." It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The enemy regrouped outside the wall, their shouts growing louder, closer, more confident. They thought the Americans were finished. And maybe they were. Mara's eyes darted to the floor, a crater of shattered concrete, a chunk of wall blown apart, the faint smell of burning insulation. It was chaos, but within chaos she saw patterns. That's what medicine had taught her: look past the noise, find the system underneath. She watched the enemy shadows flicker in the smoke, moving through 2 choke points, the same ones they'd used before. Predictable, efficient, lethal. If she couldn't outgun them, she could outthink them. "Raise," she called again. "Grenades." 2 frags, 1 smoke. Her mind clicked through possibilities like a field manual in overdrive. 2 grenades to close the left approach. Smoke to cover retreat or reposition. Maybe enough. On my mark, she said. Pixie, suppress left breach. Lewis, right. Rays, prep both frags. Cole, Rays yelled back. You're out of your mind. Maybe, she shot back, but it's all I've got. She leaned into the window frame, shoulders squared, and fired again. Each pull of the trigger was clean, efficient, precise. Her training as a medic had taught her anatomy, the fragile architecture of the human body. Now, horrifyingly, that knowledge made her a better shot. Center mass, breathe, squeeze. Another figure fell, then another. Frag out, Rays yelled. The explosions rolled through the courtyard, thunder trapped in a cage of stone. Dust and screams followed, then silence. For a moment the onslaught faltered. The air seemed to hold its breath. Then from the smoke Mara saw it, the faint shimmer of something beyond the courtyard. A stack of crates. The weapons cache. The intel had been right. The Taliban had stashed their supplies here. Ammunition, explosives, maybe even communication gear. It was all sitting across 50 meters of open ground. 50 meters of death. She swallowed. If they didn't resupply, they'd be overrun in minutes. Rays saw her looking. Don't even think about it. I already am. Cole, it's suicide. She looked back at him, sweat and dirt streaking her face. Her voice was calm, too calm. So is waiting here. For a second, no one spoke. Then she pulled a smoke grenade from Rays's vest. When I say mark, you throw this across the yard. Pixie, Lewis, lay down everything you've got. Keep their heads down. Cole, you step out there and you're not coming back. Then make it count. Rays hesitated, then nodded. Mark. He yanked the pin and hurled the grenade. Purple smoke poured across the courtyard like a living thing, curling and twisting through bullet trails. Mara ran. The world slowed to half speed, her boots pounding the dirt, heart hammering in her throat, bullets slicing through the smoke with tracer tails of light. One round clipped her sleeve, another tore through her med pack, spilling gauze and morphine into the air like feathers. She didn't stop, she couldn't. The door to the weapons building loomed ahead, a dark, broken rectangle in a storm of dust. She hit its shoulder first and stumbled inside. It was worse than she expected. Crates of RPGs, stacks of ammo, boxes of C4 wired with simple detonators, enough to level a city block. Her breath caught. They'd been planning something big, and Charlie Company had just stumbled onto it. She moved fast, muscle memory driving her. She stripped M4 mags from captured crates, shoved them into her vest, slung an RPG across her back and grabbed 2 blocks of C4. Her fingers trembled as she twisted the timer into place. 2 minutes. No more. Let's see how you like your own medicine, she whispered. Outside, the gunfire was closing in again. She sprinted for the door, ducked low, and burst back into the smoke. A fighter rose ahead, rifle leveled. Mara fired first 3 rounds center mass. He dropped. Another appeared to her left. She spun, fired again. The M4 kicked against her shoulder, her body steady as stone. She was a medic, she was a killer, she was both and neither. By the time she reached the main building, the others were nearly out of ammo. Grab everything, she shouted, tossing spare magazines and RPG rounds across the floor. We're displacing. Where? Pixie demanded, reloading. North, there's a depression, 20 meters out, better cover. They moved fast, dragging the wounded, carrying what they could. Mara ducked back into the storage room for Mercer. He was still breathing barely, his face pale and slick with sweat. She dropped to one knee beside him. Time to go, sir. His eyes fluttered. You came back. Told you I would. She got under his arms, hooked her hands around his vest straps and began the brutal drag. Every step felt like fire in her thighs, but she didn't stop. Outside, the air howled, the ground shook. The explosion came a heartbeat later. The C4 she'd planted ignited the entire cache. A wall of flame ripped through the compound, turning the world white. The shockwave flattened everything in its path, slamming her to the ground. When she lifted her head, her ears were ringing, her body numb. The building she'd raided was gone, replaced by a crater belching smoke and fire. But the enemy was stunned, their assault shattered. "Move, move," she screamed, "now." They stumbled toward the depression, dragging Mercer, carrying the wounded, tripping over debris. Mara dropped beside Mercer and threw herself over him as debris rained down. Then the fire faded, replaced by eerie silence. Rays crawled next to her, face blackened with soot. That was insane. "Effective," she rasped. He let out a shaky laugh. "You're out of your damn mind, Cole." "Maybe," she said softly, checking Mercer's pulse, "but it worked." His breathing was shallow. She tore open his uniform again, checked the tourniquet, still holding. The wound hadn't reopened, but he was pale, his lips tinged blue, internal bleeding, punctured lung. She could treat some of it, stabilize maybe, but he needed a hospital, not a hole in the ground. She grabbed her field syringe, drew out morphine, and injected it just above his collarbone. His eyes fluttered, the pain easing from his expression. "You're not dying here," she whispered. "Not on my watch." He tried to smile. "You sound like me." "Guess I've been paying attention." Above them, the mountains groaned with distant thunder or maybe artillery. Hard to tell anymore. The storm was rolling in fast, clouds swallowing the peaks, visibility dropping. Rays adjusted the radio, static roaring. "Eagle Eye, this is Charlie Company. We are danger close, multiple wounded. Request immediate extraction." A pause then. "Negative Charlie, weather too heavy. Hold your position." Mara closed her eyes. Hold. They always said hold. As if holding was easy when you were bleeding out in the mud. Her jaw tightened. "Tell them we'll hold," she said quietly. Rays looked at her. "Can we?" "We don't have a choice." She looked around. Pixie's scalp was bandaged but still bleeding. Lewis was half conscious. Brooks had passed out from blood loss. Only 5 soldiers still able to fight. 5 against at least 40. It didn't matter, they'd hold. Because they had to. Mara repositioned the team, checked the weapons, handed out fresh mags. Her body felt like lead, but her mind was burning clear, sharp, calculating, relentless. Mercer had once told her that leadership wasn't about rank, it was about responsibility. Whoever's left standing carries the others. Now she understood. The enemy would come again, more careful this time, more spread out. She could feel it in her bones. As the wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and rain, she checked her rifle one last time. The stock was cracked, the barrel fouled with dust, but it still fired. That was enough. She crouched beside Mercer, who watched her with glassy eyes. "Did you ever think you'd end up like this, Cole?" he murmured. She smiled faintly. "Never thought much past tomorrow." "Then maybe that's what keeps you alive. Or maybe it's just stubbornness." He chuckled weakly. "Same thing in this line of work." Thunder rumbled closer. The valley darkened. In the distance, faint shouts rose again, the enemy regrouping. Mara adjusted her helmet strap and breathed in slow, steady. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't fearless. She was just a medic who refused to quit. And when the next wave came, she'd be ready. Because in the valley of death, sometimes the only thing standing between life and oblivion isn't luck or strategy. It's a single person who decides not to fall. And that person, for Charlie Company, was her. The rain began before dawn, thin at first, then heavier, turning the Afghan dust into thick mud that clung to boots and rifles alike. The storm rolled down from the mountains like a living wall, swallowing sound and sight. For a moment, it almost felt like mercy, like maybe the sky wanted to wash away the blood. but mercy never lasted long in this valley. Mara crouched low in the shallow depression, rain running down her helmet, pooling in the creases of her gloves. The mud beneath her knees was cold, slick, alive. Around her, the survivors of Charlie Company were silent, each lost in their own private storm. Rays was hunched over the radio, coaxing it like a dying heartbeat. Pixie sat against the earth wall, eyes half closed, rifle across her lap. Brooks was unconscious, wrapped in a poncho that did little to stop the chill. Mercer lay beside Mara, motionless except for the shallow rise of his chest. The rhythmic thunder of his breathing kept her grounded, proof that, somehow, he was still alive. "Any word?" she asked quietly. Rays shook his head, frustration etched in every movement. "Comms are trash. The storm's bouncing the signal. I might reach them if it clears." Mara looked out toward the haze. The world had shrunk to 30 meters of visibility. Beyond that, just rain and ghosts. They were cut off, surrounded by mountains, pinned in a bowl of mud and fire. And somewhere out there, the enemy was reorganizing. She could feel it. The silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. Her heart thudded, steady but low. Adrenaline had faded hours ago. What remained was something colder, endurance, sharpened to a fine edge. Mercer stirred, eyes opening just enough to find her. "Report," he rasped. She leaned closer. "Minimal ammo, 6 wounded, weather grounded evac, we're holding position." His lips twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile. "Still giving orders." "Someone has to." "That's my job." "Not today." He didn't argue. Maybe because he couldn't, or maybe because he trusted her enough not to. The rain fell harder, pelting their helmets like 1,000 impatient fingers. Mara scanned the ridge, movement flickered there, a hint of shapes between the rocks. She froze. "Rays," she whispered, "north slope 70 meters." He followed her gaze, squinting through the mist. "I see them." Her pulse quickened. They were coming again, silhouettes slipping through the gray, weapons low, using the storm for cover. Smart, patient, the kind of enemy who'd learned the rhythm of American tactics and turned them against them. "Positions," she said softly. "Pixie, take left arc. Lewis, right. Rays, stay on the comms but keep your rifle ready." No one argued. They trusted her now, not because of rank, but because she'd earned it in fire and blood. She adjusted Mercer's rifle, the stock slick with rain. The familiar metallic weight settled against her shoulder. She breathed in, out. The storm muted everything, even her heartbeat. The first shot broke the silence, a single pop from the ridge, then a flurry of answering fire. Bullets hissed into the mud, kicking up fountains around them. Mara ducked, returned fire, quick bursts. Pixie shouted, "They're flanking left." "I've got them." Her rifle cracked again, and 2 shapes dropped. The rain blurred everything, friend, foe, horizon, until the world became a shifting watercolor of motion and noise. She remembered the clinic back home, fluorescent lights humming above rows of wounded soldiers. She remembered thinking then that chaos had a smell, blood, disinfectant, burned cloth. She'd been wrong. Chaos had a sound, the uneven rhythm of gunfire, the breath between screams. "Mara," Rays yelled, "we're almost dry on ammo." "Then make every shot mean something." He gave a breathless laugh. "That's what Mercer always says." "Yeah," she said, eyes narrowing through the scope. "Guess it's stuck." The enemy kept coming, relentless, methodical, but so did they. Each time the line wavered, someone filled it. Each time a rifle fell silent, another picked it up. And through it all, Mara moved like she was built for this, shifting from medic to fighter and back again. She pressed a dressing to Brooks's leg between reloads, adjusted a tourniquet, then fired 2 rounds over his shoulder to keep a fighter's head down. The storm blurred time. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was the other way around. At some point, the gunfire faded. The enemy retreated again, dragged back by the weight of their losses. The valley went quiet, except for rain and breathing. Mara slumped back against the wall, her hands trembling. She looked down, blood and rainwater mixed in her lap, impossible to tell whose it was. "Status," she whispered. "Still alive," Pixie muttered, voice raw. Rays nodded weakly. "I think they're regrouping. Maybe they'll wait for daylight." Mara glanced toward the horizon. Daylight. That word felt foreign now. She looked at Mercer. His face was ashen, his pulse faint. She tore open another IV bag, her last one, and hung it from a bent rifle stuck in the ground. The drip hit his veins, slow, steady. "Hold on," she murmured. "Just hold on." He didn't respond, but his breathing stayed even. The rain began to thin, the clouds breaking apart into ragged silver. The storm was ending. That meant visibility. That meant the drones might return, and so would the enemy. Rays tapped the radio again, static giving way to a flicker of voice. "Charlie Company, this is Eagle 11. Do you copy?" Mara lunged toward him. "This is Charlie, we copy." "Reading weak but clear, sitrep." She rattled off coordinates, strength, casualties. "Understood. Predator drone overhead in 5 mics. Be advised, large enemy movement approaching your grid. Can you hold another 30 minutes? 30 minutes. Mara glanced around, the wounded, the mud, the smoke still curling from the ruined compound. "We'll hold," she said. When she ended the transmission, Rays looked at her like she was crazy. "We can't hold 30 minutes, Cole. We barely held 10. She met his eyes, steady and cold. "Then we make 10 feel like 30. He almost smiled. "You really are out of your mind." "Comes with the job." The sound of distant voices carried through the rain, enemy shouts, commands, rallying cries. They were coming again, this time with anger in their step. Mara reloaded. Pixie adjusted her helmet. Lewis whispered a prayer. "Whatever happens," Mara said quietly, "you keep firing, you don't stop. You don't let them take this ground." Ray snorted. "You sound like Mercer." She gave a half smile. "Guess leadership's contagious." Then the ridge erupted. The enemy poured down in waves, firing blind into the smoke, shouting, charging through the mud. The air turned into a storm of bullets. "Contact front," Pixie yelled. Mara fired until her rifle clicked empty, reloaded and fired again. The barrel burned her palms, but she didn't care. She felt every heartbeat like a drum. When a grenade landed near the wounded, she dove, grabbed it, and hurled it back over the embankment before it could detonate. The blast rocked the earth, flinging mud into the air. "Cole, they're breaching right side," Rays shouted. "On it." She swung the rifle around, took aim through the rain and squeezed. 3 rounds, 1, 2, 3, and the breach fell silent again. But there were too many. She glanced back at Mercer. He was awake, barely, watching her with eyes that still held command even from the edge of death. "Cole," he croaked. "I know. Artillery, call it in." She hesitated, danger close. "Do it." Rays looked at her. "We'll be inside the blast radius." "I know." The words came calm, even. She crawled to the radio, snatched the handset from Rays's hand and pressed the button. "Lightning Base, this is Charlie Company, grid 206 by 151. Fire mission, danger close. We are overrun." The operator on the other end hesitated. "Confirmed danger close." "Confirmed." A beat of silence, then rounds out. Mara dropped the handset, turned and shouted, "Take cover." She threw herself over Mercer again, pressing his head down into the mud. The air trembled. Then the sky fell. The first shell hit 100 meters out, a flash of orange swallowing the ridge. The second landed closer, shaking the ground. Then came the barrage, thunder incarnate, tearing the mountains open. The concussion flattened everything. Dirt and rock rained down. The air vanished, replaced by pure force. Mara couldn't breathe, couldn't hear, couldn't move. She clung to Mercer, holding him as if sheer will could keep him tethered to the world. When the final shell fell silent, all that remained was the ringing, that same endless ringing that had started this nightmare. She lifted her head. The ridge was gone, the enemy positions obliterated. Ray's voice came faintly through the fog. Adjust fire, cease. He stopped, realizing there was nothing left to adjust. They survived. Somehow. Mara rolled off Mercer, gasping. Her ears bled, her vision swam, but the sky above was clear now, pale gray turning to light. And through the haze came the sound she'd been waiting for, the low, steady thrum of helicopter blades. Dust off 3-1 inbound, the radio crackled. Pop smoke for visual. Rays fumbled with a canister, lit it, and tossed it high. Green smoke coiled into the wind. The Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, blades slicing rain into mist. Door gunners scanned the ground, rifles ready. They descended fast, too fast, rotors whipping mud into whirlwinds. Flight medics jumped down before the wheels even touched, sprinting toward the wounded. One looked at Mara wide-eyed. Who's in command here? Mara straightened, her face streaked with blood and rain. I am. The medic blinked. You're the one who called the artillery. Someone had to. He stared for half a second, then nodded. Let's get them out. She helped load Mercer onto the stretcher, her hands steady though her heart was shaking. As they lifted him into the helicopter, his eyes opened. He looked at her, really looked at her. Mara. She leaned close. I'm here. He smiled weakly. You did it. She shook her head. We did it. No, he whispered. You led them. The rotors drowned the rest. As the helicopter lifted, the wind from the blades tore through her hair and stung her eyes. She raised a hand in a half salute, half farewell, watching as the bird disappeared into the gray. When the last sound faded, the valley was quiet again, burned, broken, but quiet. She stood there, rifle slung, medical pack torn open, surrounded by the aftermath of hell. Pixie limped over, bloodied but grinning faintly. You're insane, you know that. Yeah, Mara said, voice hollow, but everyone's alive. Pixie looked around. That's something. It's everything. Mara turned her eyes to the ridge where the enemy had fallen. Smoke rose in lazy curls against the light. She didn't feel victory, just relief, and beneath that a grief she couldn't name. Because she'd saved them all, but something in her had died doing it. The world was quiet again, too quiet. When the last rotor faded into the clouds, only the sound of wind and rain remained, soft, endless, cruel in its calm. The valley that had been a battlefield only hours before now looked almost peaceful, as if the earth itself was pretending nothing had happened. Mara Cole stood at the edge of the crater, her boots sinking into wet ash. The air still smelled of cordite and burned metal. All around her lay the remains of the fight, shredded walls, twisted rifles, helmets half buried in mud. The silence pressed against her until she felt it in her bones. She had always believed silence meant safety, but now it only felt like loss. Cole, Pixie's voice broke through, hoarse, uncertain. The medevac's gone. Reinforcements are 20 minutes out. Mara turned slightly. Pixie's face was streaked with grime, one arm wrapped tight with a field dressing, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Ray sat slumped near the radio, exhaustion painted in every line of his body. You good? Mara asked. Pixie gave a hollow laugh. Define good. Mara didn't smile. She just nodded, scanning the ridge again. Smoke curled from what was left of the enemy's positions, a graveyard of twisted bodies and shattered stone. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, nothing more. Her mind replayed it all in flashes. Mercer's pale face as he told her to lead, the moment she took his rifle, the sound of her own voice calling in artillery on their position. The shockwave, the screams. Now there was only silence and her heartbeat. She knelt, running her fingers over the edge of a bullet-pocked helmet. Private Kyle Porter's name was stenciled on the inside in faint ink. He'd been evacuated, still breathing barely. She hoped he'd make it. She needed him too. "You okay?" Pixie asked, stepping closer. Mara looked up slowly. "Yeah." Pixie studied her face, unconvinced. "You don't look okay." Mara stood. "None of us do." They said nothing else. There was nothing to say. By the time reinforcements arrived, a platoon from Firebase Lightning, the storm had passed completely. The valley lay under pale light now, a thin mist curling through the ruins. The lieutenant leading the relief squad looked barely old enough to shave. His boots were clean, his voice sharp with textbook precision. "Who's the on-scene commander?" Ray's pointed without hesitation. "Sergeant Cole." The lieutenant blinked. "The medic." Pixie answered before Mara could. "A soldier who just saved your platoon from a massacre." The lieutenant's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded stiffly and began directing his men to secure the perimeter. Mara watched them work, efficient, careful, detached. It was strange seeing soldiers move through the same space she'd nearly died in, their faces calm, unshaken. For them, this was just another sight. For her, it was a memory that would never stop replaying. She crouched beside the depression where Mercer had lain. The imprint of his body was still there, a dark hollow in the mud. She could almost hear his voice again, "Be that leader, Mara." Her throat tightened. Pixie came to stand beside her. "You did good." Mara's eyes stayed on the ground. "I called fire on our own position. And saved everyone doing it. Doesn't make it easier." Pixie nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't." They stood in silence as the relief team cleared the last corners of the compound. A few soldiers moved past with stretchers, collecting bodies, Taliban mostly, but a few of their own. Each one carried the weight of something bigger than a name tag. When the last was loaded, a senior medic from the relief team approached Mara. "You coming with us?" Mara hesitated. Her legs ached. Her hands shook. Her body screamed for rest. But something inside her refused to leave yet. "Not till they're all on the birds," she said. The medic gave her a long look, then nodded. "Understood." It took another hour before the final helicopter lifted off. The rotors stirred the dust again, making her eyes sting. She raised an arm to shield her face and watched as the bird climbed into the gray morning sky. And then, at last, she let herself breathe. Only then did she realize how badly her hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was gone, leaving only the hollow ache of exhaustion. She sat down hard in the mud, staring at her gloves, torn, blackened, slick with drying blood that wasn't all hers. Pixie crouched beside her. "You need a medic, Cole." Mara gave a tired smile. "I am one." Pixie exhaled. "That's not the same thing." For a moment, they just sat there, two soldiers in the aftermath of something bigger than both of them. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of everything they couldn't say. When the convoy finally rolled out toward base, Mara rode in the back of a Humvee, her head resting against the metal wall. Every jolt sent pain through her ribs. She ignored it. She stared out the window as the mountains passed, thinking how beautiful they looked from a distance, so calm, so cruel. The sun was rising now, gold over the peaks. It didn't seem fair, how light could look so clean in a place where everything else felt stained. By the time they reached Firebase Lightning, the sky had turned clear blue. The base was alive with movement, engines, orders, medics running to meet incoming birds. When she stepped out, people stopped to stare. Her uniform was shredded, her helmet dented, her pack ripped nearly in half. Mercer's M4 still hung from her shoulder. She looked like a ghost of war, blood and mud and silence. A young corporal hurried up to her. "Sergeant Cole, command wants you in debrief as soon as you're cleared." She nodded, her voice flat. "Where's Commander Mercer?" In surgery, they said he's stable. The words hit like a wave. Stable. That was enough for now. They gave her a tent, a cot, a set of clean clothes. She sat under the harsh light, scrubbing blood from her hands until her skin turned raw. No matter how much she washed, it wouldn't come off the stain of what she'd done, what she'd had to do. When she finally lay down, sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the valley again. The muzzle flashes, the sound of her own voice over the radio, fire for effect. The blast, the silence. And Mercer's eyes, fatting, trusting her to do the unthinkable. By dawn, she gave up trying to sleep. She sat outside her tent, watching the sky lighten over the mountains. Somewhere, a generator hummed. The smell of coffee drifted on the air. Life moved on like it always did. Pixie found her there. She had a cup in one hand, a bandage around her head, and that same tired grin she always wore after something impossible. "They say we're heroes," she said, handing Mara the cup. Mara took it, staring into the steam. "Feels wrong." Pixie shrugged. "Maybe it always does." They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Pixie spoke again, softer now. "You know Mercer asked for you." Mara looked up. "When?" "Last night, after surgery. He woke up just long enough to ask if you made it." Mara nodded slowly, her throat tightening again. "Guess he doesn't know how stubborn I am." Pixie smiled faintly. "He knows, believe me." Later that afternoon, they called her to medical HQ. The debrief room was bright, cold, lined with whiteboards and screens showing satellite maps. A colonel sat across from her, the kind of man who'd seen too many reports and not enough battlefields. "Sergeant Cole," he began, voice clipped. "We've reviewed initial telemetry and drone footage from your position. You were in command after Commander Mercer was incapacitated." "Yes, sir." "And you made the decision to call danger close artillery on your own coordinates." "Yes, sir." He studied her. "Do you understand the implications of that decision?" Mara met his gaze. "Yes, sir, I do." "And yet you proceeded." "Yes, sir, because it was the only way to keep my team alive." The colonel leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're aware that by protocol, medics are designated non-combatants in most field conditions." "I'm aware." "Then why pick up that rifle?" She hesitated, then said simply, "Because there was no one else left to." The colonel said nothing for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "Understood." When the debrief ended, she walked out into the sunlight, the weight of it all pressing down harder than any pack she'd ever carried. That night she visited Mercer in the recovery tent. He looked fragile, pale, thin, his leg heavily bandaged. But his eyes opened when she entered, and that same calm strength flickered there. "Permission to speak freely?" she asked. "Always." "You're a terrible patient." He smiled weakly. "So I've been told." For a long moment they said nothing, just the hum of the monitors, the faint rustle of the canvas above. "You did what I asked," he said finally. "I did what had to be done." "Same thing." Mara shook her head. "No, sir, you give orders, I improvised." "That's called leadership." She looked at him, eyes wet. "I called fire on our own position, sir." He met her gaze evenly. "And because of that, every one of us came home. Don't ever apologize for doing what war demands." His words hung between them, heavy, hard, true. When she left his tent, the night was cool. The stars stretched endlessly above the base, bright and silent. She stood there for a long time, letting the wind wash through her hair, listening to the faint sounds of life, generators, footsteps, laughter somewhere far off. For the first time, she realized what she'd really become. Not a hero, not just a medic. A survivor. And survival, she knew now, came with a cost. The applause sounded distant, muffled like a memory underwater. Mara stood at attention in the east room of the White House, lights spilling through the tall windows, glinting off the rows of medals and uniforms. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and history. Every breath felt too loud. Every movement felt like it belonged to someone else. The president was speaking, his words steady, deliberate, echoing across the room. She barely heard them. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere with mud, blood, and thunder. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life, above and beyond the call of duty. The words drifted around her, heavy as the metal that weighted on the velvet cushion beside him. She was aware of Mercer standing nearby, cane in hand, uniform immaculate, a ghost of the man he'd been before Cunnar. His eyes met hers briefly, calm, proud, but with something else behind them, something like sorrow. And then the president stepped forward, lifting the Medal of Honor from its case. The weight of it surprised her. The ribbon brushed her neck as the medal settled against her chest, cool metal, warm meaning. Applause broke out again. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, she heard someone whistle softly, a sound of admiration that made her flinch more than the explosions ever had. She smiled because that was what they expected, but inside something cracked. When the ceremony ended, she found herself standing in a sea of hands, handshakes, congratulations, and rehearsed admiration. You're a hero. Incredible courage. An inspiration to all medics. She nodded, thanked them, smiled politely. None of them had been there. None of them had seen the bodies, or the blood, or the moment she'd had to decide whether to stay a medic or become something else entirely. Heroes were clean in their eyes, but war never was. Later, when the crowd thinned, Mercer found her near the corner of the hall. His limp was pronounced but steady. His uniform gleamed, though his face looked older, drawn. "You clean up well," he said, voice roughened by months of recovery. She managed a smile. "You should have seen me in the valley." "I did, that's why we're both standing here." They walked together through the hall's quiet corridors, away from the cameras and speeches. The marble floors echoed under their boots. "How's the leg?" she asked softly. "Functional enough to kick stubborn sergeants who won't take compliments." "Good luck catching one." He chuckled, then stopped, leaning slightly on his cane. "You know, I've had a lot of time to think since that day." "Me too," she said. "I keep coming back to one thing," he went on. "What you did taking command, calling that artillery, running through fire to that cache, that wasn't training. That was something else. Desperation. Instinct. Same thing." He shook his head. "No, instinct is what keeps people alive. Desperation gets them killed. You didn't just survive, Cole, you led." Mara looked away, her eyes tracing the portraits on the wall, generations of men who'd made impossible choices, all of them immortalized in oil and gold frames. "I didn't feel like a leader," she said quietly. "I felt like I was breaking everything I'd ever been taught. Sometimes breaking it is the only way to rebuild it." She turned to face him. "And what about the oath? Do no harm. I picked up your rifle, Mercer. I killed men that day." "You saved 20. Her jaw tightened. "Doesn't make it clean." "It's not supposed to be." He sighed, his gaze softening. "You think I've never felt that? Every commander does. Every decision in combat sits on a line between mercy and murder. You just had the courage to cross it when no one else could." For a long moment, they said nothing. The weight of his words lingered between them like smoke. "Anyway," Mercer said finally, forcing a smile, "you know what they're saying about you back at the academy?" Myra raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" "That the medics are rewriting doctrine because of you. They're calling it the Cole Protocol, emergency, command authority for medical personnel." She blinked. "They're changing the rules." "They have to. You showed them what's possible." Mara exhaled, leaning back against the wall. "I never wanted to be anyone's example." "Too late for that." A voice called them back toward the main hall, aides, photographers, a waiting line of people eager to shake their hands. Mercer gave her a knowing look. "You'll get used to it." I'd rather be back in the field. He smiled faintly. That's why you won't. After the ceremony, the reception buzzed with conversation, champagne, polished shoes, laughter that felt out of place. Mara drifted from group to group, polite but distant. Every time someone thanked her for her service, she thought of the crater, the smell of burned soil, the silence afterward. It wasn't glory she remembered, it was weight. Then, unexpectedly, a familiar voice broke through the noise. Sergeant Cole. She turned. The man before her was older, his uniform heavy with ribbons. Deep lines etched his face, the kind carved by both time and conscience. The Army Chief of Staff. Sir, she said, straightening instinctively. At ease, he said with a faint smile. I've been waiting to meet you. Mara nodded, unsure what to say. What you did out there, the general said slowly, it's got everyone talking. Command, training, doctrine. You've started more conversations than you realize. Good or bad ones? He chuckled. Both. The good ones are calling you revolutionary. The bad ones are afraid you're right. About what? That the line between combatant and caregiver doesn't exist anymore. That in modern war, everyone is both. Mara's gaze dropped to the floor. That line, supposed to mean something. It still does, the general said gently. But you prove that saving lives sometimes means breaking old definitions. The oath to do no harm, it's noble, but in war, harm's already been done. Your job is to stop it from spreading. He paused, studying her face. You did that. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. When he left, she found herself alone again, the metal heavy on her chest. She touched it lightly, feeling the cold metal under her fingertips. It didn't feel like honor. It felt like memory, hard, unyielding, impossible to forget. Later that night, in her hotel room, she sat by the window overlooking the city lights. Washington glowed, clean, quiet, far away from everything that had burned in the valley. She could almost pretend it was another world. She took the medal off, laid it on the table beside her, and stared at it. It wasn't the medal she saw, though. It was Porter's face when he bled out, Pixie's shaking hands as she reloaded, Mercer's voice in her ear, fatting but steady. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, sharper somehow, older. She whispered to the empty room, I'm still a medic. The words were half reminder, half prayer. The next morning, she returned to base for reassignment. She expected debriefings, maybe even reassessment for command training. Instead, the colonel met her at the gate with a smile that looked more like respect. Congratulations, Master Sergeant Cole, he said, handing her a new set of stripes. She stared at them. That was fast. Not fast enough. She didn't argue. Promotions meant nothing compared to what they'd lost, but part of her understood it wasn't just about rank. It was about recognition. The Army was changing because of what had happened in that valley. Weeks turned into months. She spent them training new medics, rewriting manuals, running live fire simulations that mirrored her experience. Every recruit she spoke to looked at her like she was legend. That made her uneasy. Don't look at me like that, she told one young trainee during a field exercise. I'm not here to tell you how to be heroes. I'm here to make sure you get home alive. They listened, they always did. Because her voice carried the authority of someone who'd been there, who'd made the impossible choices and lived with them. One evening after training, she sat alone in the empty classroom, the sunset painting the walls orange. Her hands rested on the table, calloused, scarred. She stared at them for a long time. They were the same hands that had held pressure on bleeding wounds, started IVs in the dark, tied tourniquets with trembling fingers. The same hands that had squeezed a trigger. She'd saved lives with these hands. She'd taken them too. And somehow she had to live with both. The door creaked open behind her. Mercer stepped in, still walking with his cane. Figured I'd find you here, he said. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. Neither could I. He leaned against the wall, watching her quietly. "You ever think about that day?" "Every day." He nodded slowly. "Me too. Sometimes I wonder if I'd have made the same call." "You would have," she said without hesitation. "You taught me how." He smiled faintly. "Then I did one thing right." "You did more than one." The silence stretched between them, comfortable this time. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. "You know, Cole, the army's going to keep changing. More wars, more rules rewritten. But what you did, it's going to echo, long after we're gone." Mara looked at him, eyes steady. "Echoes fade, sir." "Maybe, but the truth doesn't." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You saved us, Mara. Don't ever doubt that." When he was gone, she sat for a long time in the fading light, listening to the hum of distant engines, the murmur of base life carrying on. The metal gleamed faintly on the desk beside her, a piece of metal that would outlast everything else. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, and whispered, "It's not about metals. It's about bringing them home." Outside, the sky darkened to blue, and for the first time since that valley, Mara Cole allowed herself to breathe, not like a soldier, not like a hero, but like a human being still learning how to live with what she'd done. Because healing, she realized, wasn't about saving others anymore. It was about finding a way to save herself. The classroom was silent except for the hum of the projector and the faint scratch of pencils. Rows of young faces watched the screen, drone footage from Cunnar, grainy and gray, showing a handful of figures pinned behind a wall as artillery bloomed like lightning around them. When the clip ended, the room stayed quiet. No one dared speak. Mara stood at the front, arms folded, the metal hidden beneath her uniform jacket. She didn't wear it here. Here, it was a distraction, a ghost she didn't want following her students. Finally, one of the trainees raised a hand. "Ma'am, that's you, isn't it?" Mara met his gaze, unreadable. It was. The cadet swallowed. What did it feel like? She paused, considering the question. Like failing, until it didn't. The room shifted uneasily. Mara let the silence linger. She learned that silence taught better than speeches ever could. "People like to tell stories about moments like that," she said finally. "They like to make them sound clean, heroic, but the truth is," she stepped closer, voice dropping to a calm, measured tone, "you never feel like a hero in the middle of it. You feel terrified, you feel small. You feel the weight of every decision pressing against your chest, and afterward you don't feel proud, you just feel tired." Her eyes swept the room, these young medics barely 20, their uniforms crisp, boots unscuffed. They hadn't yet learned what real fear smelled like. "One day," she said softly, "you'll find yourself with someone bleeding out in your arms and the world will be chaos around you. Your hands will shake. Your training will be the only thing between them and death. And in that moment, you'll understand something no textbook can teach." She picked up a medical pack from the desk and held it up. "This is your weapon, but sometimes," she paused, letting the words settle, "sometimes you'll have to pick up another kind." The students exchanged uncertain glances. Mara nodded slowly. "That's the part they don't teach you, that saving lives doesn't always look like saving lives. Sometimes it means making choices you'll never stop thinking about, choices that haunt you at night." Her voice softened further. "But that's what this job is. It's not about medals or glory. It's about the moment between a heartbeat and silence and what you decide to do with it." When the class ended, the students filed out quietly, their faces thoughtful. One lingered, a young woman, dark hair tucked under her cap. "Ma'am," she asked hesitantly, "how did you know what to do that day?" Mara looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't. I just refused to do nothing." The cadet nodded, eyes shining, then saluted and left. When the door closed, Mara let out a slow breath. She sat on the edge of the desk, the quiet pressing in. The projector light flickered, playing shadows across the wall. For a moment, she wasn't in the classroom anymore. She was back in the valley. the smell of smoke, the shockwave, the sound of her own breath. She could still hear Mercer's voice, "You're a soldier first." Her hand drifted unconsciously to the metal under her jacket. It was cold, even through the fabric. Later that evening, she found herself walking the training grounds, the sunset painting the horizon in streaks of orange and violet. Cadets were running drills, their shouts echoing through the field. She watched them move crisp, eager, fearless. It reminded her of herself once before she'd learned how fragile that confidence really was. A familiar voice called from behind. "You still can't stay away from the field, can you?" She turned. Mercer stood there, his cane tapping lightly against the dirt path. He looked stronger now, the limp still there, but less pronounced. "Old habits," she said, managing a smile. He nodded toward the cadets. "You're making them better." "I'm trying. They look at you like you walk on water. I hope they never have to learn how deep it gets." Mercer chuckled, low and dry. "You always did have a way with metaphors." She smiled faintly. "Guess war turns everyone into a poet." He studied her for a long moment. "You ever think about leaving?" She shook her head. "This is where I belong." "Teaching. Preparing." He nodded, understanding. "You know, when I first met you, you were all precision and order. You treated chaos like something to tame. Now," he paused, "you've learned to live in it." "Guess chaos doesn't scare me anymore." "It should," he said softly. "That's how you know you're still human." They walked in silence for a while, the sky dimming, the air cooling. The sound of distant laughter from the barracks drifted over the field. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Mercer stopped near the fence line, leaning on his cane. "You ever read old battlefield doctrine?" he asked suddenly. She smirked. "I used to memorize it." He smiled. "Then you'll remember what it said about medics, non-combatants, neutral, protected under Geneva." "Yeah." He turned to face her. "Do you still believe that?" Mara hesitated. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was personal. "I believe in saving lives," she said slowly. "But I also believe the battlefield doesn't care about definitions. You adapt or you die. And sometimes adapting means breaking rules written by people who have never heard a bullet snap past their ear." Mercer nodded approvingly, spoken like a leader. "I'm not a leader," she said softly. "I'm just the one who didn't stop moving." That's what leadership is. The quiet stretched again, heavy with everything they didn't say, about the valley, about the dead, about what came after. Finally, Mercer broke the silence. "There's a conference next month. Medical Command wants you to speak. They're rewriting the doctrine officially. Your experience will be the template." Mara frowned. "They want me to talk about that day. They want you to talk about what it means to fight and heal at the same time." She looked away toward the horizon, the last of the sunlight slipping behind the mountains. "I don't know if I can do that." "Yes, you can." She gave him a wry look. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her quarters, the hum of the air vent filling the dark. The memories came in waves, flashes of light, the sound of the artillery, the feeling of Mercer's blood on her gloves. It had been years, and still some nights she woke gasping, her fingers curled as if still gripping a tourniquet. She sat up, rubbed her face, and reached for the small box on her nightstand. Inside was the letter, the one she'd kept folded for years now, the edges worn soft. It was from Kyle Porter's mother. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes tracing the faded handwriting. "My son is alive because of you. Not just because you stopped his bleeding, but because you made sure there was a helicopter to get him home. Thank you for being both a healer and a warrior when my boy needed both." Mara read it again slowly, as she always did. That letter was her anchor, her proof that maybe, just maybe, what she'd done hadn't been wrong. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You're welcome, ma'am." The next morning she stood before a new class of medics. Her tone was steady, calm, unpretentious. "You'll hear people call you angels on the battlefield," she began. "Don't believe it. Angels don't get blood on their hands. We do." A few of the trainees shifted uncomfortably. She continued. "You'll see things that break you, you'll make choices that haunt you, and you'll carry people both literally and here." She tapped her chest. "And when it gets heavy, remember this. Your mission isn't to be perfect, it's to bring them home." One of the trainees asked, "Ma'am, is it true you once called artillery on your own position?" Mara smiled faintly. "It's true, and I'd do it again." The room went silent. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "you don't get to choose between right and wrong. You only choose who lives." The class listened in absolute stillness, and in that silence she knew they understood, not fully, not yet, but enough. Later, when she dismissed them, she lingered alone in the classroom again, sunlight filtering through the blinds. She ran her hand across the rows of empty desks. So many lives would pass through these seats, each one carrying the possibility of loss, courage, and impossible choices. Mercer found her there hours later, still standing at the front. "Thinking again?" he asked gently. "Always." "What about this time?" She looked at him, eyes distant. "About how fragile it all is, how quick it happens. One second you're patching a wound, the next you're rewriting doctrine." He smiled faintly. "The army doesn't change easily. You did that." "I just survived." "No," he said quietly, "you evolved." Mara didn't reply. She looked out the window again, the parade field stretching beyond, cadets running drills in the distance. For the first time in a long time, she felt something almost like peace. Not because the ghosts were gone, they never would be, but because she'd finally learned how to live beside them. The battlefield had taken her innocence, but it had given her clarity that war isn't about hate or heroism. It's about endurance, about holding on to humanity when everything tries to strip it away. And maybe she thought that was enough. The auditorium was full, but it felt like a cathedral, wide, silent, sacred in its own way. The air buzzed with the hum of anticipation, the soft scrape of boots on the floor, the low murmur of hundreds of soldiers and medics waiting for her to speak. Mara Cole stood backstage, her fingers brushing against the edge of the podium where her notes waited. She didn't need them. She never used notes anymore. Words that came from memory didn't need paper. They only needed courage. She looked down at her hands, scarred, steady. The same hands that had held dying soldiers, fired rifles, pulled tourniquets until blood flow stopped. The same hands that had once trembled as she made the hardest choice of her life. And yet, even now, they didn't shake. Mercer's voice echoed softly in her memory. "You evolved." Maybe he was right. A young aide approached, whispering, "Ma'am, they're ready for you." Mara nodded once. "Let's give them something worth remembering." She stepped out into the light. The crowd rose instinctively, applause breaking like thunder, boots stomping the floor. She raised a hand not to quiet them, but to steady herself against the tide of it. When they finally sat, she stood still for a moment, letting the silence return. She didn't start with her name or her rank or her title. She just asked a question. "Why do we save lives?" The words hung in the air. No one answered. She took a slow breath. It's not as simple as it sounds. Some people will tell you it's duty. Others will say it's honor. But when you've been there, really been there, when you've held someone's heartbeat in your hands and felt it slipping away, you understand it's something else. Her voice softened, but it carried through the hall. We save lives because we can't stand to do nothing. Because the alternative, the silence, the helplessness, would destroy us faster than any bullet. She let that settle before continuing. "When I was a young medic, I thought healing meant staying clean, keeping your hands free of blood that wasn't your patient's. I thought the oath meant never crossing certain lines." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then one day, in a valley that's now just coordinates on a map. I learned that sometimes saving lives means stepping over those lines and living with the consequences forever. The audience was utterly silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I was told that day that medics don't fight, that we're protected neutral, that the red cross on our arm means something sacred. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. But I learned that the battlefield doesn't recognize symbols. The enemy doesn't see medics or commanders or heroes. They see movement, they see threat. And in that chaos, you either adapt or you watch your people die. Her voice lowered, steady, deliberate. I picked up a rifle that day. I called fire on my own position. I made choices that broke every rule I'd ever sworn to follow. And because of those choices, every soldier under my care came home. She didn't say it with pride. She said it like truth, the kind that cut deep and stayed. A murmur rippled through the hall, the sound of realization, of understanding dawning in the faces of people who'd only ever heard the story secondhand. Mara continued quietly. People call me a hero for that, but I'm not. I'm a reminder of what war takes and what it demands in return. She looked down for a moment, then back up. You see, every medic here will face a moment, maybe once, maybe 100 times, where you'll have to choose between your oath and your instinct, between the life in front of you and the one still fighting behind you. And no matter what you choose, you'll carry that decision with you. Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied again. That's the part they don't prepare you for, the wait afterward. She took a step back from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. I've met soldiers who think strength is about not feeling, about burying every emotion until there's nothing left. But the strongest people I've ever known were the ones who kept feeling, who let the pain in, who learned to live with it without letting it consume them. A pause. I've patched wounds that couldn't be closed. I've said words to dying men I can't remember. I've seen courage in its purest form and fear in mine. And through it all, one truth never changed. She looked out across the room, rows of uniforms, faces, eyes fixed on her. Our duty isn't to kill. It isn't even to heal. It's to preserve life by any means necessary. She let the words linger. Sometimes that means a bandage. Sometimes it means calling artillery. Sometimes it means just holding someone's hand until the end. A long silence followed. No one moved. Then she spoke again, softer now. If you take anything from what I say today, let it be this. Heroism isn't about not breaking. It's about breaking and still moving forward, still choosing to act, even when every part of you is afraid. Her eyes glistened, though her voice never faltered. Courage isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It's quiet. It's the medic who keeps working when the bullets get too close. The commander who refuses to leave a wounded soldier behind. The moment when you realize you're out of options and you act anyway. She stopped then, the silence filling every corner of the auditorium. War doesn't end when the shooting stops, she said finally. It lives in the people who survive it, in the memories that won't fade, in the scars you hide under your sleeves. But if you can live with it, if you can carry that weight and still choose compassion, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what it really means to serve. Her eyes found Mercer sitting near the front row. He gave a slow, proud nod, the kind that needed no words. She looked back at her audience. Remember this, strength isn't found in the trigger or the tourniquet. It's found in the choice. Every single time you decide that someone else's life matters more than your own comfort, you redefine what it means to be a soldier. She stepped back to the podium, her voice now almost a whisper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. No one moved. The silence was total, reverent, heavy, sacred. Then one by one they rose, not the rushed applause of ceremony but the slow, deliberate gesture of respect. Hands came together, boots stamped. The sound built like a heartbeat, deep, powerful, alive. Mara didn't smile. She simply stood there, letting the moment pass through her. When it ended, she left the stage quietly, out a side door, into the corridor where the echoes faded. Mercer was waiting for her there. "Hell of a speech," he said softly. She exhaled, leaning against the wall. "I wasn't sure I'd get through it." "You didn't just get through it," he said. "You gave them a reason to remember why they wear the uniform." "They'll forget," she murmured. "Maybe, but they'll remember you." She looked at him, eyes tired but calm. "I don't want to be remembered." He smiled faintly. Too late for that. They walked together down the hall, the distant sound of cadets still clapping echoing behind them. Outside, the night was clear. Cool air brushed her face as they stepped into the open. The campus lights stretched across the field, rows of buildings, flags swaying, silhouettes of young soldiers moving under floodlights. Mara took a slow breath, looking out at them. "You ever wonder," she said quietly, "how many of them will make it home?" Mercer followed her gaze. "Not all, but maybe more because of you." She said nothing, just stared into the distance where darkness met horizon. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "They'll never understand what it costs." Mercer looked at her, his tone gentle. "Maybe that's the point. You paid it so they don't have to." For the first time in a long time, she smiled, not the tight, professional one she'd worn for years, but something real. Something small, fragile, but true. As they stood there in the quiet, a soft wind moved across the parade field, rustling the flags. The night sky above them was endless and clean, full of stars, the kind of stars that only appear after storms. She tilted her head up, watching them. "I used to think the battlefield was where you proved yourself," she said softly. "Now I think it's just where you find out who you are." Mercer nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "And who are you, Mara Cole?" She thought about it for a long time before answering. "I'm still figuring that out." They stood there until the last lights in the academy went dark, two soldiers bound not by rank or medals, but by the silence between battles, the kind only survivors understand. And for the first time since Cunnar, Mara Cole didn't feel the valley pulling at her anymore. She'd finally climbed out of it. The wind that swept across the training field that morning was soft, almost tender, the kind of breeze that carried both warmth and memory. Mara Cole stood alone near the perimeter fence, the sunrise stretching gold across the horizon. The grass shimmered in dew, boots lined in perfect formation far in the distance where cadets were gathering for morning drills. She could hear their voices, faint and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something still alive. It had been 5 years since Cunnar. Sometimes it felt like 5 minutes. Sometimes it felt like another life entirely. The base had changed. New barracks, new faces, new insignias that carried echoes of lessons learned the hard way. Her name was somewhere in those manuals now, the Cole Protocol. She never liked that. To her, it wasn't doctrine. It was just a moment of necessity, but war had a way of turning survival into legend. She sipped her coffee, the air crisp with early light. The medal she once carried with her everywhere now hung on the wall of her quarters, gathering dust. She didn't need to wear it anymore. It had served its purpose. Mercer's voice echoed in her mind, steady, calm, familiar. "You paid the cost so they don't have to." He was gone now. Retired first, then gone quietly without ceremony. His service flag hung in her office, folded tight, edges sharp. She had spoken at his memorial, standing in the same hall where she once gave her speech. And for the first time, her voice had broken halfway through. He'd been more than a commander. He'd been the voice that steadied her when the world tilted. The one who reminded her that leadership wasn't about orders, it was about care. She missed him more than she'd admit. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. "Ma'am." A young medic stood there, fresh-faced, barely older than 20. His uniform was perfect, his expression nervous. "Morning, soldier," she said. "Morning, ma'am." He hesitated, clutching a folder. "Command wanted me to give you this. Your reassignment orders." She raised an eyebrow. Reassignment. Yes, ma'am. Forward deployment. Humanitarian Medical Detachment. Northern Syria. She took the folder slowly, flipping it open. The words blurred for a second before coming into focus. Medical Operations Lead, Civilian Conflict Zone, Voluntary Command. Voluntary, she murmured. Yes, ma'am. They said you're the only one who didn't have to be asked. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Guess I never learned how to stop. He shifted awkwardly. It's an honor to meet you, Sergeant Cole. My brother, he said you saved him once. She looked up sharply. What was his name? Kyle Porter. For a moment she couldn't speak. He said you never left him, the young medic continued. He told me to tell you you gave him his life back. Mara exhaled slowly, eyes softening. How's he doing? Married, 2 kids, working in emergency response back home. She nodded, her throat tightening. Good, he was always tougher than he thought. The medic smiled, then saluted. Good luck out there, ma'am. She returned it with quiet dignity. You too. Remember, you're there to bring them home. When he left, she looked down at the orders again, then toward the horizon. Another conflict, another mission, different uniforms, same pain. She could have said no. No one would have blamed her, but something deep inside her, the same pull that once made her run toward gunfire instead of away from it, told her she wasn't done yet. War might have taken parts of her, but it had also given her purpose. Later that day, she visited the medical wing. The air there was sharp with antiseptic, alive with movement. New recruits moved between beds, checking vitals, changing dressings, practicing calm under pressure. One of them dropped a tray, cursing under his breath. She crouched, helped him pick it up. First day, she asked. He nodded, embarrassed. Yes, ma'am, I don't think I'm cut out for this. She smiled faintly. Neither did I, but you don't have to be fearless. You just have to care enough to act. The words surprised her, Mercer's words once, now hers. The cycle continued. That evening she walked the quiet halls of the academy for the last time. Her boots echoed against the tile. On the wall hung photographs, faces of medics past and present, frozen in moments of care, exhaustion, triumph. Her own photo was there now too. She stopped in front of it. It was from the ceremony years ago, clean uniform, metal shining, eyes calm. But looking at it now, she barely recognized herself. That woman was still holding her breath. This one had finally learned to breathe again. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of a quote etched beneath one of the academy plaques. In war, the ones who save lives carry the heaviest weight. She traced the words with her fingertips, then whispered, and still we carry it. Her transport left at dawn. The plane ride was quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed with anticipation. Below, the world shifted from green to desert, from cities to endless dust. She watched through the small window as the sun rose higher, painting the horizon gold. When she landed, the air was dry and sharp. The humanitarian camp stretched across the valley below, tents, vehicles, children running barefoot through the dust. It smelled like heat and diesel and life trying to survive. This war was different. There were no uniforms on the victims here, no sides to choose, only people trying to live another day. She was greeted by a young doctor from the UN. Sergeant Cole, he said, extending a hand. We're honored to have you. We've read your work. The Cole Protocol changed how we train field medics. She smiled faintly. Protocols are just words. Saving people takes hands. He nodded. Then we're in good hands. The days that followed were a blur of motion, triage tents, supply drops, air evacuations, wounds from bombs, from starvation, from loss. She moved through it all with quiet focus, her voice calm, her presence grounding. The local nurses called her the Quiet Storm. One night, after hours of treating civilians injured in an airstrike, she sat outside her tent, the desert stars vast and endless above. The camp was silent except for distant murmurs and the crackle of generators. A small boy wandered up to her, 7, maybe 8 years old. His arm was bandaged, his face smeared with dust. "You are soldier?" he asked softly. She smiled, "Not anymore." He studied her for a moment, then pointed at her hands. "You fight." "I help." He nodded seriously. "You save people." "I try." He thought about that, then said something in his language that the interpreter later told her meant, "You have brave heart." She laughed quietly, maybe just a tired one. The boy sat beside her, resting his head against her arm. Together they looked at the sky, wide, quiet, infinite. Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not peace exactly, something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. The kind that came after all the storms. The next morning she led a convoy to an isolated village that had gone weeks without medical supplies. The roads were rough, the terrain open. She rode in the back of a truck, wind whipping through her hair, eyes scanning the horizon. She no longer felt like a ghost of war. She felt alive, weathered, steady, present. When they reached the village, children ran to meet them. She handed out rations, checked bandages, smiled when she could. A local nurse took her hand at one point, pressing it between both of hers. "Thank you," she said in broken English. "You bring life." Mara looked around, tense, laughter, movement. "No," she said softly. "They already have life, I just help them keep it." That night, as she wrote her report under dim lamplight, a gust of wind blew through the tent, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain. She paused, listening to it. It sounded almost like applause. Or maybe memory. She thought of the valley again, of Mercer, of Pixie, of all the names etched into her heart. She thought of the boy beside her, of Kyle Porter's children, of the cadets still training somewhere far away. War had taken so much from her, but it had also left her with this, the quiet understanding that life, in all its fragile beauty, was worth every wound she'd ever endured. She looked up at the stars again, whispering into the night. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Her eyes closed, and for the first time since the war, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like home,